Where we began, or where we actually ended last week, was on the concept of lesson 21, meditation. And what I'm saying here is that what Harari says is an appropriate framework for meditation would be that meditation improves our capability to advantage the experiencing self. So if you have the narrating self and the experiencing self, as we talked about before, the narrating self actually affects action. It is where controls our myths, which has gotten us to the top of the food chain. It basically works on the realities of our subjective reality and the intersubjective realities, whereas the experiencing self basically focuses more on the objective reality and the rational. Okay, so the idea is, if we want to advantage objective reality, we want to move more towards the experiencing self. And Harari feels that meditation gives us the capability to actually override our brain's natural desire to prioritize and advantage the narrating self. Next thing he says is, why does advantaging our experiencing self help us in the perceived futures? And what he's saying is it improves our capability to welcome the partnership with disruptive technologies. The disruptive technologies will, right now, the way we understand them, they will advantage objective reality. And therefore, if we are also advantaging objective reality, then we stand a better chance of having a better partnership and stronger means of communication. Then he says what really matters in determining our meaning. Right, and this is where he gets to what decisions are paramount to our mode of being, our meaning. And this, even in the first book, he asks us, what do we want to want? And then this is, the modes of being. And this example here is from a Bostrom, but the modes of being shows that that humans have a very small part of the modes of being of what are the possible modes of being. Animals have a much larger part, and humans plus, which is where we're talking about, if we talk about general artificial intelligence, is more, but then humans plus plus, which is a chance to experience all the different modes of being. And so if you think about it, when we meditate, we tend to actually experience additional modes of being and get a better grasp into the other modes of being, is what he's saying, I believe. Okay? And then the idea is what decisions are paramount to our mode of being, our meaning. What do we want to want? What decisions and policies do we think should be made by technology? And what decisions and policies should be made by sapiens? And if the technology makes all of the decisions and policies associated with the two lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy, the physiological and safety, it seems to me like that would be great. I don't know why we have this undying decision or undying feeling that we have to make all the decisions and policies related to our physiological and our safety, if we've built tools that can do that. And so if we look at the artificial intelligence and the disruptive technologies as tools, we're looking at them as basically, why can't we just let them take care of that particular part of our life? And that's kind of then we go, why do critics have a hard time with Harari's books, is the last thing we talked about. And the idea there is that the critics, this is a little bit different, but the critics are really stuck in the river of the liberal package of democracy, capitalism, and humanism. And so you get people like Gates and where they see that Harari is needing to solve the problems, and Harari's not really a problem solver. At least that's the way we're wording it here. Others say that they myopically focus on Harari's predictions, and Harari's already said he's not doing predictions. He's he's looking at possibilities. There was a feminist out there, and she questioned his understanding of modern feminism. She picks on something like 2 or 3 paragraphs inside the whole book. So I wasn't sure where she was going with that. She said the book's a good read, but she questions his understanding of modern feminism. So I guess you have to accept that could be true. And then there's an AI specialist who questions the chapters that are not on AI, which is kind of ironic because he seems to think that the chapters that are about AI are correct, but the ones that are not about AI, which is an area that he really doesn't have any expertise either, he thinks that they're not. He questions whether they're accurate. So those are some of the critics that I read. I realized that I'm somewhat of a Harari bigot, so we have to take that into account here. But it doesn't look to me, I mean, every one of them actually recommended the book. They just had these types of questions. So cautions to think about, or things to think about when you read Harari's book. And that's kind of the end of the 21 lessons in the book itself. And then we're going to go to week 8 and talk about what happens and what we discussed for the issues revolving around week 8. And what we're going to talk about there is, what people have been asking is basically, what can we do right now? How can we make a difference? We as the class, what can we do? And I talked about the fact that we're really talking about Harari being an analyst and not a designer, right? So he talks about the fact that we have to recognize that we're dealing with complex problems. We have to recognize that it's a dynamic process, so it's a moving target all the time. And we have to recognize that it's a system. And these are the things that are very prominent if you understand those. I think you get a better understanding of what Harari's saying, where he's trying to go. So if you look at the idea of complex, and we talked about Harari, if he were walked across a bunch of bridges in the United States and came back and said, I saw a bunch of cracks in the bridges, would we say, well, that's that until you can tell us how to fix them, you're not telling us anything that we care about? And that's not true. So an analyst's job is to really broaden our view, open up our minds to other possibilities, and to see things that are happening, but not necessarily be able to solve them all, right? And then when he looks at a dynamic process, the devil is in the details, and there's no question about the fact that that there's all kinds of issues revolving around these bridges. It could be a material issue, it could be a traffic issue, an age of the bridge issue, the type of bridge that it is, the weather in that particular region. I mean, all these things can be, and actually combinations of them and everything can be what you have to look at to decide how you want to design a solution. So the solutions have to be designed at a myopic level, whereas the analysis is done at a much higher level, is what I'm saying. All right. And then the idea that it's a system, and the importance here is that there's a tendency for our species, but certainly for a modern man, to look at a system as if there's a hierarchy of what's the most valuable, or a priority of what's the most valuable item in a system. And I think if you were to ask all of the engineers prior to the Challenger accident, what was the most what was the most important element of the space capsule, that no one would have picked the O-rings. I mean, and so, but the idea behind it is that every system really, if it's correct, and if it's designed correctly, but they all interact, and so you can't just pick one out and think that the system will still function well. So the idea that we've learned about systems is that there is no real necessary priority in systems. So what this does is this gets us kind of into a mindset, what he's provided with is an analysis of complex dynamic process systems, right? And so what Harari's big issue though is that we are not ready. He believes that the reason he's, that he's, trying to roll the flag up the flagpole here is that he feels that we as a species are not ready. We have to get ourselves ready for what's coming. If it is true, and if he's right, that we are at this elbow of of change, right, of human progress through time, if we are at this elbow, and that it's rising at this kind of speed, that we have to start answering these questions. We have to start putting them forward first. We can't keep just letting what happens happen. Now, that being said, if you are such that you actually believe that we're just on this natural path here, and I think you can look at actually the Harari book is probably not that interesting to you, because you can really look and say that if you just take that path and you move it across into progressive issues, which says, okay, we're just going to spend some money and fix things up a little bit, that addresses that path, all right, and so a performance behind progressive issues does that. If you're have more of a conservative bent, and you can actually see where you almost also can cover the curve of the future with just fix it without actually even having to spend any money. Certainly not having to break down the vested interest, but not having to spend any money either. So the point is that the only real position that doesn't work, if you believe that we're not on this exponential curve, but on this just gradual curve, then is leave me alone, right? You really have to do something. But I don't know anybody who doesn't really think that we have to do something. Okay, so that's how I perceive that there are people out there who read what Harari says, and they come back and they say, well, I think that if we just tweak this thing a little bit, that we can still we can deal with all the change that we see coming at us, and that's the progressives. The conservatives say that we're just doing fine for the most part. All we have to do is reprioritize what we already have, and we'll be fine. And so that's two other views of looking at what Harari is talking about. However, if you believe that we really are on this exponential curve, then none of those would work. You have to break through the vested interest, spend money, and you have to break through the inertia of leaving me alone. So let's look at what Harari says is how can we get ready? And what I think that he's saying in the first part of the book, right, where he talks about disillusionment, work, liberty, and equality, is that the liberal package of democracy, capitalism, and humanism hasn't delivered. It's had 250 years to deliver. It was championed, from 1970 to 1996, it was championed by almost an additional 100 nations, and yet it hasn't delivered. And so the thing is, we can't treat that as if that is sacrosanct. We can't say that we have to solve this problem, but within the liberal package has to be what we use to solve the problem. And I'm going to make a kind of an assumption here that since I'm talking to bully boom or baby boomers, what I'm really saying is that what we have to do is we have to start to use create stories that work for us and that work for the new vision. So we have to have stories that welcome disruptive technologies. Our stories, our games, our books, are all the narrative, and we have to start liking narratives that are out there that champion those type of things, and we have to, in essence, dislike things that are out there that create obstacles to the right narrative. So things that talk about how we have to get everybody working, and rather than saying, okay, we really have to come up with a solution where man isn't working, at least if we want to define doing those things that are last two levels of the Maslow cycle as work, then that type of work is going to be gone. Right? We have to look at the fact that liberty and equality, as we understand them, are really, if that's the narrative, if the narrative is a liberty narrative or an equality narrative, that may not be the right narrative for preparing people for what the future is. And we may need a different type of narrative. And so with that different narrative, maybe they will come up with different solutions. And I think the same thing is true of his next set of chapters, right? The ones on community, civilization, nationalism and religion, and immigration. Because what he says is that basically, as far as civilization is concerned, the current narrative is a narrative of how they are extremely different. And he says that that's not really, the objective reality is that the civilizations, they agree on much more than they disagree on. And so we have to start to champion narratives that push the concept that we are in agreement as civilizations in many more items that we are disagreement in. And we have to, again, dislike, if you will, narratives that talk about that try to push a narrative of nationalism, religion, or immigration as an issue. So we have to start to like the narratives that are going to be the narratives that are I think are in line with at least what Harari is saying. These are the narratives that we have to start to put a positive spin on. The same thing is the next section where he talks about terrorism, war, God, and secularism, and humility. right? And so this is where we're talking about what are going to be the values, what are the ends that we're after. And he says that, for us, we have to start to encourage humility and start looking at and basically promoting and championing narratives that are about humility, about how we humbly meet and how we humbly partner with our technology and stop trying to conquer. Right, and the same thing, providing the dislikes, if you will, to the negative narratives of terrorism, war, God, and secularism. I mean, think about that with regards to, say, games. I mean, the whole gaming industry is probably built on the idea of war and God and terrorism. So we have to start to encourage a whole different narrative in some of those areas. And then finally, in the last section, he talks about ignorance, post-truth, justice, and science fiction, and then he talks about how that's that really are the means, right? So the end was that we wanted to, or the value was that we wanted to become more humble, so that we can then deliver what I'll show later as his three major values, and the means are that we will have to reduce suffering. So we start again. Let's start putting positive spin there, or not spin. That's the wrong word, I guess. But positive response to things that are moving that narrative, rather than ones that are moving the narrative of ignorance and post-truth. So that's how I see the first big four sections, and then the last section, which we just talked about too, is that I believe he sees education, meaningful stories, and meditation will help us reduce suffering and brutality, welcome to disruptive technologies, and advantage objective reality, which I see as his three basic values that he wants us to look at. So if we were to take something like in America, if we were to evaluate the programs at the institutional layer, right? So if we were to say that, look at the RNC platform and the Republican National Platform and the Democratic platforms, and we could take each line item from those, or each program that they promote, and see how do they fit. Do they fit in the reducing brutality, welcoming technologies, or advantaging objective reality? And that will give us a better feel. We can create a scorecard for those things. And the same thing with the market and the economy. It's more important. Well, this is my feeling. It's more important that we focus on, is the economy doing those things? The market is, I think, tends to be more like it's my prejudice here, but the market tends to be more like a casino, and so, but the economy, are the things that we are promoting in the economy, are they doing things that help reduce brutality, welcome disruptive technologies, and advantage objective reality? And then in social programs, right, are offline programs versus online programs, and look at all of those also. So we want to promote and champion offline social programs that reduce brutality, and champion online programs that also reduce brutality. So that's what I see. We have to kind of build a scorecard in order to do that. Now, it's important when you do this that you kind of start with a model of what you would like to see happen. And one of the good things is to start with one that you basically know you don't want to see happen. And so these are, three people out there that are pretty prominent. That Stephen Hawking says he doesn't want to see autonomous weapons, economic disruption, machines that develop a will of their own, and machines with mission in conflict with us. Those are the four areas that he thinks that we ought to be cautioned against. Musk thinks that now that it is engaged in recursive self-improvement, if its optimization or utility function is something that is detrimental to humanity. So if the optimization or utility function for the recursive self-improvement is say to make the world, there's a science fiction about making the world safe for humans, and the computer or in the science fiction comes up with the idea that the only way it could guarantee that is actually by eliminating all the humans, because they are the challenge. And so he's saying that we have to be careful that we don't build an optimization or utility function that's detrimental to humanity. And Gates is much more focused about what about the purpose problem, okay? And He's saying that let's focus on making sure that that when we look at all this stuff, that people still have a purpose, because he thinks people still need a purpose, and right now, if the jobs are all gone and some of the liberal package is no longer available, what is going to be the purpose? And we have to constantly address that, is what Gates is saying. Okay, and then so the idea here is that if we build a model of what we like to see happen, and so we take reducing brutality, welcoming disruptive technologies, advantaging objective reality, and getting outside the box. What we're going to see is as we travel or down this path of what we like to see happen, there's going to be times when it tries to make a right or a left that really is not in line with what we want to do. So what we want to do is provide intermediate expectations with checkpoints, okay, in our models, and how I can check that that let's say that if it were a political issue, that the Republican National Committee was improving in terms of these three values in their platform, or in the same thing with the Democratic National Committee, and see if they are actually even addressing some of these issues, because some of the concern we have today is that they're not even addressing them at all. And this is just a model that I actually built myself a long time ago, but when I built a model of reducing brutality and suffering, and so I looked at some of the major issues that we have out there, like we're losing an enormous amount of topsoil each year. We're losing clean water. We want to reduce our use of oil, our loss of the wetlands, our loss of the forests, the use of coal, use of non-replaceable minerals, and improve our ozone layer. So that's like reducing brutality towards the planet. And so let's look at, let's say, the Republican programs and the Democratic programs and see if they are aimed at any of these things. So, let's look at the market and see if the market economy is aimed at any of these things, or the market or the economy are aimed at any of these things, and also see if the offline and online or the social programs, see if they're also aimed at this kind of stuff. And I have a whole slew of other ones: reducing brutality towards our own species, toward other species, and toward our own citizens. So these are some of the areas that I think we should be trying to build our model, and then we can use that as a guide. Because as far as I can tell, I mean, there's so few people who are actually going to be instrumental in the actual development of the technologies that are the disruptive technologies. What we really have to do is we have to make our voice heard. And the way we can do that in today's world of social media with likes and dislikes. That's what people actually respond to. And so that gives us power that we hadn't even thought about, was the power of likes and dislikes. And so what I'm saying is that we can use a model and then build our own model and then use that as our criteria, because the tendency with likes and dislikes is to just use our gut feel, and it may be feel good. Like a Rocky movie may feel good, but it really doesn't promote any of the things that we're talking about. So let's try and be more rigorous about how we approach that stuff, is what I'm saying here. Okay, and what criteria should we use to discourage an effort that might make things better over the short term? Because sometimes you put in a short term improvement. And then it can often lull people to sleep, okay? And so we want to make sure that it doesn't disguise the pain, but potentially hinder the solution. So we don't want to put in a work program that basically disguises the fact that really all the jobs all those bottom line jobs in the Maslow thing are going to be gone, and instead, and then just make work in essence for people, make and keep those things active that really are no longer necessary. And then if it champions one of the values at the expense of the other two, so if something champions reducing brutality, but basically doesn't welcome disruptive technologies or advantage objective reality. And it basically, matter of fact, it basically discourages disruptive technologies and encourages subjective reality. Then it's something that we don't necessarily want to champion, and if it could take too long to implement. So these are some of the things that we want to make sure that we don't encourage. And so next week, since this is basically our last week, next week what we're going to do is we're going to talk about next week is spring break. So we're not going to be talking about anything. All those things are off the table. And I hope you have a good vacation, and see you at the end. See you in April. Thank you.